Welcome to the Echo Lab, the place where music's best-kept secrets come to light. In every episode, we uncover the overlooked legends, the underground classics, and the hidden influences that shape the soundtrack of generations. From cult bands and iconic session players to the untold stories behind timeless tracks. If you're a fan of deep cuts and deep dives, you're in the right place. Make sure to like, subscribe, and follow so you never miss a beat. Let's get into the story behind the sound. Joe Satriani, Notes from Another World. If you ever picked up a guitar and dreamed of bending time and space with a solo, chances are you've crossed paths, directly or indirectly, with the legacy of Joe Satriani. He wasn't a flashy frontman. He didn't need a singer. In fact, what made Satriani different is what made him matter. The guitar did the talking, and when he played, it didn't just shred, it sang. Born July 15, 1956, in Westbury, New York, Joe grew up in a big Italian-American family. Music was around, but not exactly in the way you'd expect for a future instrumental rock legend. His early love was sports, football in particular, and by all accounts, he was just a regular kid. Until one moment changed everything. It was 1970. Joe was 14. He heard the news that Jimi Hendrix had died, and something inside him lit up. Not grief, not fandom, a calling. He'd never even played guitar, but he told his football coach right then and there, "I'm quitting the team. I'm going to be a guitar player like Jimi Hendrix." And from that day forward, he was all in. Joe dove into practice with a kind of intensity that separated the casual dreamers from the lifers. He didn't just want to play well. He wanted to understand the language of guitar, the theory, the emotion, the physicality. While other kids were figuring out chords, Joe was dissecting jazz voicings and Bach counterpoint. He was meticulous, obsessed, driven. But here's the twist. Joe wasn't just a player. He was a teacher. In the late 70s and early 80s, while building his own sound, he taught guitar to a new wave of players who would go on to reshape modern rock. Steve Vai, Kirk Hammett, Alex Skolnick, Charlie Hunter. Think about that. Before Joe Satriani ever hit the charts, he'd already molded the hands that would steer bands like Metallica, Testament, and Whitesnake. But back then, Joe was still the unknown genius, the guy teaching lessons to pay the bills, gigging around California, and recording demos with nothing but heart and hustle. That started to change in 1986. With a modest budget and almost no label support, Joe dropped his first full-length solo album, Not of This Earth. It wasn't a commercial smash, but it was something else, different. The guitar wasn't just riffing, it was leading, telling stories, expressing emotion without a single lyric. And while the production was raw, the talent was undeniable. Still, it was the next record that changed everything. In 1987, Joe Satriani released Surfing with the Alien. And that title alone tells you something. It wasn't just an album, it was a statement. The cover featured Marvel's Silver Surfer, a lone figure streaking across the stars. And that's exactly what Satriani's music sounded like, cosmic, sleek, unbound by gravity. The album was a revolution in instrumental rock. It didn't hide behind vocals or gimmicks. It didn't beg for airplay. It just ripped. Tracks like Satch Boogie, Always With Me, Always With You, and the title cut became instant guitar anthems. But more than technical feats, they were emotional. Joe made the guitar cry, whisper, scream, and soar. You didn't need lyrics to feel what he was saying. The melodies were so strong, they played in your head like choruses. Critics didn't know what to do with it. It didn't fit the hair metal mold. It wasn't metal. It wasn't jazz fusion. It was something new, and fans responded. Surfing with the Alien became one of the first instrumental guitar albums to break into the mainstream, going gold and eventually platinum. That same year, Satriani joined Mick Jagger's solo tour as lead guitarist. Yeah, the Joe from Long Island, the former guitar teacher, was suddenly on stage with a Rolling Stone, playing stadiums. It was surreal, and it introduced him to a global audience. What followed was a run of albums that solidified his status as not just a guitar hero, but an innovator. Flying in a Blue Dream in 1989 showed his range. It had grit, groove, even vocals from Joe himself, a rare move and not the strongest part of the record, but it didn't matter. Tracks like the Mystical Potato Head Groove Thing proved Joe could write playful, complex, and still unforgettable music. Then came The Extremists in 1992, with some of his most beloved tracks like Summer Song, which became a radio staple, and even found its way into sports arenas and TV ads. By now, Satriani wasn't just in the conversation of greatest living guitarists, he was the standard, and yet he stayed grounded. No wild scandals, no tabloid drama, just a guy who lived to play. Through the 90s and into the 2000s, Joe Satriani kept evolving, never chasing trends, just chasing tone. He was like a scientist in a lab, dialing in new textures, experimenting with scales, effects, and phrasing. His records weren't just exercises in speed. They were explorations. Albums like Crystal Planet, Engines of Creation, and Is There Love in Space proved that Joe wasn't content to repeat himself. He blended analog with digital, bringing in synths, drum machines, even electronic beats, all while keeping guitar front and center. But what really sets Satriani apart isn't just the technique, it's the discipline. He's famously methodical, practicing for hours, cataloging chord shapes, modes, and phrasing ideas like a scholar. He once said he had boxes full of handwritten notes just on different ways to approach a scale. That's the level we're talking about. He wasn't relying on raw talent. He was building a vocabulary and then writing poetry with it. And then there's G3. In 1996, Satriani launched what became one of the most iconic touring acts in guitar history, G3. The concept was simple: 3 elite guitarists sharing one stage, trading solos and blowing minds. Over the years, G3 featured everyone from Steve Vai and Eric Johnson to Yngwie Malmsteen, Paul Gilbert, John Petrucci, and more. It wasn't a shred contest, it was a celebration. And Joe was always the glue, the calm center. The guy who didn't need to outplay anyone because his playing already had its own orbit. Through it all, he remained a mentor, a collaborator, a tone chaser, and perhaps most importantly, a fan of the instrument. He still spoke about the guitar with awe, like a kid discovering it for the first time. By the 2010s, Joe Satriani had nothing left to prove, but he kept pushing forward anyway. Albums like Black Swans and Wormhole Wizards and Shockwave Supernova showed his continued curiosity. He leaned into prog rock, funk, jazz, blues, whatever the moment called for. And somehow, it all still sounded like him. That's the mark of a true artist. No matter the style, the tone, or the gear, when Joe plays, you know it's Joe. Speaking of gear, we can't talk about Satriani without touching on the tools of his trade. The Ibanez JS Series guitars are built to his specs. Sleek, fast necks, versatile pickups, and a tone that cuts like a laser. And then there's a signature Chrome Boy, a mirrored finish that looks like it was forged in some alien sound lab. He paired those guitars with his own Vox saturator pedals, signature amps, and a rig that's always evolving. But here's the thing, he never hid behind effects. Everything he adds to his tone serves the music. It's not about flash, it's about feel. And even after decades of touring, Satriani remained present. At his shows, he wasn't some unreachable virtuoso. He talked to the audience, smiled between songs, gave shout-outs to the other players. He wasn't trying to be a god. He was just a guy playing his heart out. His humility never dulled the edge of his talent. If anything, it sharpened it. As the years rolled on, Joe Satriani kept doing what he always did, evolving, experimenting, and inspiring. In 2020, he released Shape Shifting, an album that felt like a personal mixtape of all his favorite styles. Surf rock, hard rock, soulful ballads, even flashes of cinematic soundscapes. It wasn't a greatest hits, it was a greatest feels, and it proved that even decades and Joe was still hungry. Then in 2022 came The Elephants of Mars, recorded during the COVID lockdown. It gave Joe time to reflect, to dig deeper, and to push his playing in new directions. And the result? One of his most creative records in years. It was heavy and weird and beautiful, full of textures and turns you wouldn't expect. But that's always been the magic of Satriani. He never stopped chasing the next sound, the next melody, the next way to make a guitar speak. And even after all the accolades, the Grammy nominations, the chart-topping records, the massive world tours, he remained that same kid who once practiced until his fingers bled, chasing the ghost of Hendrix. For the guitar community, Joe is more than a player. He's a mentor, a blueprint, the guy who taught us that instrumental music doesn't have to be background noise. It can be emotional, spiritual, electric, in every sense of the word. He opened the door for generations of guitarists who wanted to say something without ever opening their mouths. And he did it without ego, without gimmicks, just a guitar and a vision. So when you hear a song like Always With Me, Always With You, and it hits you in that place you can't quite explain, that's Joe's true gift. Not the speed, not the scales, but the soul. Because in a world of noise, Joe Satriani made melody matter. And decades later, he's still out there, still playing, still evolving, still surfing with the alien. Thanks for hanging out with the Echo Lab. Whether you're listening on your favorite podcast app or watching on YouTube, we appreciate you being here. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow, subscribe, and drop a review or comment to let us know what you think. Got a band, topic, or a deep cut you want featured? Shoot us a message. Until next time, this is the Echo Lab, where we dive into the story behind the sound.